Hey everyone! We all know about the Chicago Bulls. We know about Red Kerr, B.J. Armstrong, Bob Love, Horace Grant, Steve Kerr, Jerry Sloan, Phil Jackson, Dennis Rodman, Derrick Rose, Kirk Heinrich, Scottie Pippen, Zach LaVine, and some guy named Michael Jordan. However, the Bulls were far from the first professional basketball team to call Chicago home. In 1946, when the Basketball Association of America, which we all know now currently as the NBA, was formed, we got teams we still have today like the Lakers, the Celtics, Warriors, and Pistons, and located in Chicago, Illinois, there was the Chicago Stags. The Stags played in Chicago Stadium where the Blackhawks also played, and later the Bulls up until being replaced by the United Center in the early 90s. Named after male red deer, the Stags sported a color scheme of red, blue, and white, much like the Chicago flag. It's also interesting how one of the Bulls' rivals, the Milwaukee Bucks, is also named after deer, and here's a team that predates both of them. Anyways, just an interesting thought. Despite scarcely lasting from 1946 to 1950, the Stags remain a successful team. In their first year, they established a 38-22 record and were tied in their division with the St. Louis Bombers, leading to both teams playing in a tiebreaker game for both the division and a playoff appearance as well as a first-round bye. The Stags beat St. Louis in that game and would later beat the Washington Capitals 4-2 in the semifinals. They made it to the BAA finals, but unfortunately lost to the Philadelphia Warriors 4-1. All things considered, it's pretty impressive to reach that far in your first year of existence. The Stags in the 1947-1948 season would finish 28-20, being one game behind St. Louis this time, but to get a playoff spot, they had to play in another tiebreaker, this time against Washington. They would end up surpassing them and advance to the first round of the playoffs against the Boston Celtics, and ended up beating them as well. Regrettably, the Stags would end up losing in the semifinals to the eventual champions that year, the Baltimore Bullets. In the 1948-1949 season, the Stags would finish third in their division, 7 games behind the Rochester Royals. Fortunately for Chicago, the playoffs were expanded, so instead of 6 playoff teams, it was now 8. Unfortunately, they were swept by the Minneapolis Lakers in the first round, marking the first year where the Stags didn't win a playoff series. The 1949-1950 season would end up being the Stags' last season, but they certainly didn't know it at the time. This would also be the first season where the BAA and the National Basketball League would merge into the now NBA. They ended the season with a 40-28 record and tied for third with the Fort Wayne Pistons, followed by another first-round loss to the Lakers. However, this was the beginning of a roller coaster of an off-season for the team. On April 25th, 1950, the Tri-Cities Blackhawks would draft the now legendary Bob Cousy out of Holy Cross in the first round of that year's NBA draft. However, Cousy wanted more money than what Tri-Cities owner Ben Kerner was offering, so they traded him to Chicago. Later in June 1950, the owner of the Harlem Globetrotters, Abe Saperstein, tried to buy the Stags with the intention of renaming them the Chicago Bruins, a name previously used by George Halas's American Basketball League team that existed from 1925 to 1931. Saperstein would have them play doubleheaders with the Globetrotters as well as quote-unquote home games across several different arenas across the country, much like the Globetrotters did. After all, this was nevertheless the early days of professional basketball. However, the deal fell through later that September, and Saperstein withdrew his offer to buy the Stags. The NBA then foreclosed on the Stags as the team wasn't able to pay back a $40,000 loan, which translates to $491,570.12 in 2022, and that was the unfortunate end of the Chicago Stags. On October 5th, 1950, the NBA held a dispersal draft, giving Stags players to the other NBA teams, including Bob Cousy. Cousy would be acquired by the Celtics, and the rest is history. As a result, there went the Stags, and there went professional basketball in Chicago, at least for the time being. That being said, the Stags have not been completely forgotten. In the 2005-2006 season, the Bulls donned Stags throwbacks as a part of the NBA's Hardwood Classics program, and I think wearing those jerseys were good karma that even though the Bulls finished 4th in the Central Division at 41-41, they still made the playoffs for the second year in a row. Granted, one could argue that was due to a weak Eastern Conference, but still, this was the push the team needed at the time since the Bulls hadn't been a consistent playoff contender since The Last Dance in 1998. But still, the old spirits of the Stags seemed to push the Bulls into the playoffs. Sure, they'd lose to the Miami Heat, who went on to win the finals that year, but the Bulls would get revenge on Miami in the first round the very next year. The Stags might not be the most remembered team in the NBA's history, nor will Mitchell and Ness be making merch to bank off of nostalgia for them unless they really want to go for the 80 and up crowd, but the Stags remain integral. They are still a part of the NBA's extensive history from participating in the league's first ever finals to establishing Chicago basketball. And on top of that, the Stags were still more successful than the NBA's next attempt at a team in Chicago, but that's another story for another day. Anyways, take care.